My name is Claire Donnelly, and I have been an ER nurse at St. Luke's Memorial Hospital in Pittsburgh for nearly 14 years. I have seen blood in every form. Arterial spurts that paint walls, quiet oozes that stain sheets, and pools that mark the final silence of a human life. I have stood in rooms where 20 hands fought against death, and others where I was the only one present to bear witness. But the case that has never left me was not about blood, or even about death itself. It was about a child. A little girl whose lips barely moved, yet whose whisper carried like thunder inside me. What she said should have been impossible, and yet I heard it as clearly as I hear my own breath. It happened just after midnight, the hour when hospitals take on a personality of their own. The day shift's noise had long since drained away. The visitors were gone, leaving only the lonely glow of vending machines and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. The ER slows after midnight, but it never rests. It just shifts. The traumas that come then feel heavier. The air is thicker, as if each second is weighted with consequence. Nights like that, you feel the building watching you. I was finishing notes on a middle-aged man with chest pain. Not a classic presentation, but enough risk factors that we were keeping him for observation. I remember staring at the monitor screen, forcing myself to type the words, when the intercom above my head hissed to life. Pediatric incoming. ETA, 2 minutes. Possible seizure activity, unknown cause. The words hit me like a hand to the chest. Pediatric. Possible seizure, unknown cause. Even after so many years, pediatric calls had the power to make me go cold inside. I stood so quickly my chair rolled back and hit the counter behind me. 2 minutes isn't enough time for anyone to prepare, but it's just long enough to feel every ounce of dread seep into your bones. I pushed into Trauma 2 with my colleagues, the trauma bay's sterile brightness already humming as machines came to life. Oxygen was checked, suction tested, IV kits cracked open. The doctor on duty barked short, efficient orders that cut through the quiet. I moved quickly, but my chest felt tight, my pulse oddly fast. And then the stretcher burst through the double doors. The paramedics looked tired, grim. On it lay a girl, maybe 7 or 8, with tangled, dark hair plastered against her damp forehead. Her skin was pale in that particular way you never want to see in a child, too white, with a faint bluish tint around her lips. Her eyes half rolled under the lids, but her mouth moved, small tremors of sound spilling into the air like broken glass. I stepped forward, leaning close with my stethoscope ready, and that's when it happened. Her breath caught, her head shifted ever so slightly toward me, and she whispered. Barely more than the sound of air passing through lips, but I heard it. I heard it as though the words had been etched directly into my skull. Don't let him in. It was so soft, so impossible, that for half a second I thought I had imagined it. But her lips had moved, unmistakably. My body froze, one hand suspended above her arm, stethoscope dangling. The paramedic was speaking, something about tonic-clonic activity witnessed at home, postictal state on arrival, initial blood sugar normal. But I couldn't hear him. The words drowned in the echo of hers. Don't let him in. I glanced around the room, half expecting one of my colleagues to be staring at me, to confirm what I'd heard. But no one else reacted. They were already moving. The physician checking pupils, another nurse preparing seizure meds, respiratory hovering with oxygen tubing. The world was still turning, still grinding on in its clinical rhythm. Only I had been pulled out of it, into some darker orbit. The attending's voice cracked the spell. Claire, IV access, now. My hands moved on instinct. Tourniquet, catheter, flash of blood, saline lock, fluids running. I had done this thousands of times, but tonight it felt like someone else was controlling my hands. My eyes flicked back to hers. The girl's gaze had sharpened for a second, just enough to lock with mine, glassy, but deliberate. It wasn't the gaze of a seizing child. It was the gaze of someone delivering a message, urgent and desperate. I wanted to ask, God help me. I wanted to lean close and whisper back, Who am I not supposed to let in? But the room surged around me, oxygen applied, Ativan drawn up, the doctor calling for labs and a court. So I said nothing. I worked. I told myself I had imagined it. Children in altered states mutter all kinds of things. Fragments of dreams, snippets of conversations overheard at home, meaningless syllables pulled from misfiring neurons. That's what it had to be. A random fragment of electricity, sparking across a vulnerable brain. That's all. But even as I repeated it in my head, the words lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Don't let him in. I caught movement at the edge of the room, a shadow stretching too long across the far wall. My breath hitched, and I turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Only the hiss of oxygen and the steady beeping of the monitor. For an instant, though, I could swear the room had grown colder. We stabilized her vitals enough to move her toward court. As the gurney wheels rattled down the hall, I stayed behind, suddenly aware of how tightly I was gripping the chart in my hand. My knuckles had gone white. I forced my breath to slow, but it felt like my lungs couldn't quite fill. That whisper had been meant for me. Not the doctor, not the paramedics, not anyone else in that room. Just me. And I couldn't stop thinking about the strange, impossible truth of it. Children on the brink of unconsciousness do not focus their gaze, do not craft warnings, do not whisper with intent. Yet that is exactly what she had done. I followed them to imaging, my feet carrying me forward, but my mind was still trapped back in trauma too. Trapped in the sound of her voice, that fragile yet certain command. I told myself over and over it was nothing more than seizure activity, the random noise of a firing brain. But deep down, something inside me already knew. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. And if it was deliberate, then it was meant to be obeyed. They rolled her into the CT suite, while the doors hissed shut behind us, the fluorescent light there a colder, cleaner white than in the ER bays, as if the room itself were determined to bleach the human mess out of whatever entered it. The tech glanced at me, already taping the small foam cushion around the girl's head to keep her still, and I stood at the shoulder of the gurney with my hand on the IV line, feeling the pulse of warm fluid moving through the tubing as if it were a second, artificial heartbeat. The monitor clung to her like a stubborn shadow, heart rate in the 150s, oxygen saturation hovering at 98% with supplemental flow, blood pressure whispering low, temperature a hair above normal. Numbers you could live with. Numbers that suggest a child might just be surfacing from a storm and drifting toward shore. But when I looked at her, I didn't see shore. I saw distance. I saw a horizon line sliding away. Her eyelids fluttered again. Not seizure. Not exactly. The fine muscles in her cheeks tremored in tiny, almost purposeful bursts, like the face of someone struggling to form a word underwater. The attending leaned toward me. Ativan on board? I nodded. 1 dose. Kepra loading now. He gave the briefest inclination of his head, then turned to the tech. Quick scout, then non-contrast head. Let's not waste time. I watched the scanner slowly swallow the child, the table gliding her small body into the ring. I told myself to focus on what mattered. Airway, breathing, circulation, the pathophysiology of pediatric seizures, differentials stacking like cards. Febrile seizure unlikely at her age, hypoglycemia ruled out pre-hospital, electrolyte derangement possible, ingestion on the table until proven otherwise, central nervous system infection or inflammation not off the list, intracranial pathology needing a clean look. I told myself these things because this is how you hold the mind steady in an unsteady room. But the steadiness frayed each time my memory replayed the shape of her mouth against the air. Don't let him in. The scanner's hum settled into a note that made my teeth ache. It isn't uncommon to hear auditory illusions under these lights. The balance of fatigue and vigilance does strange things to the brain. But this wasn't an illusion. It was a memory with edges. I could feel where it cut. The images began crawling onto the screen in grayscale slices that looked like weather maps of a distant planet. The attending stepped forward with the radiologist on call, patched in by phone. No acute bleed? The doc murmured, eyes flicking left to right, left to right. Ventricles appropriate. No midline shift, no Mass Effect I'm seeing. Sinuses, clear enough. We'll want MRI and EEG later, but nothing we can act on now. Nothing we can act on now is a sentence that tastes like metal. It means you are back to working with the invisible. The girl came back through the ring, the table cradling her, as if the machine wished it had warmer hands. I leaned in, checking the line, the dressing at the hand, the flush. Her pupils were equal, responsive, but sluggish in a way that made me uneasy. When I brushed a strand of damp hair from her temple, her skin felt too cool for the number on the monitor. "We should get labs moving," I said, and the attending nodded, already dictating. CBC, CMP, magnesium, calcium, lactate, ammonia, blood cultures, tox screen, urinalysis, viral panel. He glanced at the clock. "If she doesn't rouse to baseline, we'll discuss LP." I swallowed, throat tight. An LP on a child is a careful kind of violence we perform to learn whether another, more monstrous violence is happening inside. We rolled back toward the ER with a pace that felt almost reverent. The hallways were quieter now than an hour earlier, the custodial crew having retreated to the back corridors, leaving the long stretch of tile to the sound of our wheels and the soft squeak of my shoes. At a junction near the waiting room, I heard a murmur of voices, low, strained, and caught a glimpse of a man pacing with his hands pressed into his scalp, fingers laced as if to hold his skull together. A woman sat hunched on a chair, elbows on knees, face buried in her palms. "Parents?" I asked the paramedic walking beside us. He flicked a look over. "Mother at home when seizure started. Father was at work. Got there just as we were leaving. Looked upset." Upset covers many things. It covers fear and guilt and anger, and the bottomless ache of helplessness. As we passed the waiting room doorway, the man turned abruptly and saw us, and in that instant, the little girl's whisper returned with such precision that my shoulders went rigid. "Don't let him in." I couldn't say why the words pinned themselves to that moment, to that face, only that they did. He wasn't imposing. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Face raw, eyes narrow from exhaustion or habit, mouth a hard line trying not to shake. His hands dropped from his scalp as if commanded, and then clenched, like he was catching himself before he rushed us. The mother lifted her head and made a sound that wasn't a word. I felt the attending step a fraction closer to the gurney, a reflexive shielding that nurses and doctors do when families approach the critical boundary of the moving patient. I slowed the gurney just enough to let security place a gentle angle of their bodies between us and the waiting room. The mother stood. The father took a step. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Please," the mother echoed, no other syllable available. The attending's tone was soft, practiced. "We have to get her back to the room. We'll come talk to you as soon as we can. I promise we will." The father's eyes flicked to mine, like he was measuring whether my face would give him something unofficial, something human. I felt my mouth shape around the beginning of a sentence. "We're doing everything we can." But the words didn't come. The command in my head was too loud. Don't let him in. In Trauma 2 again, the lights seemed both brighter and dimmer. Brighter where they hit the stainless steel and the bed rails. Dimmer in the corners where the room's angles didn't quite meet correctly, as if the geometry had softened while we were gone. I gave report to the second nurse who'd caught up with us, then turned to labs. When I placed the tourniquet to draw blood, the girl's lashes flickered, and her lips shaped a single silent syllable that could have been anything: him, or in, or home, or help. I didn't know, but my body recognized the shape with a chill. I sent the vials flying down the pneumatic tube, the thunk of their departure like a hand clapping behind me. On the monitor, her heart rate eased into the 140s, oxygen saturation unbothered, blood pressure drifting into a pocket of normalcy that felt unearned. The numbers were good. The child did not look good. Her fingers lay open on the blanket, curled at the tips as if grasping for something small and precious that had slipped away. A respiratory therapist adjusted the nasal cannula with gentle fingers. "Come on, kiddo," she murmured. "You don't want to hang out with us." The attending stood at the foot of the bed, hands in the pockets of his white coat, gaze tight in that way I've come to recognize as both present and already building decision trees. "Claire," he said quietly, "anything from the med list or history?" I shook my head. Paramedics had little to go on. No known history passed along, no meds found on scene. "I'll confirm with Mom." The moment I said it, the whisper strained against the inside of my skull like a sound pressing at a window. "Don't let him in." I have never believed in omens at work. I've believed in pattern recognition, in experience that masquerades as instinct because you've seen enough bodies to know the 1,000 microsignals they send before the numbers catch up. But this didn't feel like pattern, it felt like trespass. "I'll go talk to the family," I said, and slipped out of the room, the door hissing shut behind me. The waiting area held that late-night hospital smell. Too much floor cleaner, barely hiding coffee gone sour. The mother sat forward in the same posture as before, elbows to knees, fingers knit so tight the knuckles were marble. The father stood, then sat, then stood again as if trapped in a private rhythm of rising and falling, tide catching his feet. I introduced myself and watched their faces change, how the mother seized on my name the way people do when they sense it might be the last normal thing they can control. "Claire," she said, and then stopped as if saying it had taken everything. "We're working on stabilizing her," I told them, keeping my voice steady. "The initial scan doesn't show bleeding or a mass. We're running labs to look for metabolic causes, infections, anything that can explain what we're seeing. She's breathing on her own. We've given medication to quiet her brain while it recovers." The father swallowed. She was fine," he said. "At dinner she was fine. We watched." He paused and looked at the mother as if unsure whether naming even the most ordinary details might somehow tip the balance. "We watched that animal show she likes." Then she said her head hurt. Then she stared. His hands opened and closed, remembering the shape of her body seizing on the couch. The mother's eyes filled but did not spill. The tears sat there like small, obedient animals refusing to move. Does she know we're here?" she asked. "I can't tell you what she knows," I said softly, and then added, "but she's not alone." The father's gaze dragged to the double doors leading back to the bays. "I need to see her." The whisper opened again inside me like a cold room. "Don't let him in." There are policies, good ones, about visitors during resuscitation and critical diagnostics. They exist for safety and privacy and the simple physics of space. I could have ported those policies into my voice without thinking, the way we do when the script is necessary. But something else rose up. Not a refusal, not obedience to words that didn't belong in a hospital. Instead, I heard myself say, "Give me a few more minutes. Let me get an update and make sure she's as stable as she looks on the monitor. I'll come right back for you." His jaw worked. "A few minutes," he repeated, and it could have been acceptance or a threat, I couldn't tell. As I walked back down the corridor, the half-lit hall stretched, distances bending just enough to make the door at the far end seem farther than physics would allow. The hush carried a whisper of air conditioning that wasn't cold until it moved across the back of my neck, raising the hairs there in a way I could not explain with ducts and vents. Trauma 2 greeted me with the exact brightness I'd left, too bright for the hour, a lie the lights tell to suggest control. The girl lay in that small, contained stillness children adopt when the body is in retreat from itself. The numbers on the monitor continued their performance, compliant, encouraging. The attending glanced up. "How are the parents?" "Waiting," I said, then added, "I told them I'd come back after we check her again." He nodded. The respiratory therapist lifted her hand in a half-wave goodbye and slipped out, and for a moment it was just the attending, the other nurse, and me, the three of us bound in a quiet more profound than the room deserved. I stepped closer to the bed. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice the kind of soft we save for pediatric rooms at night. "Your mom and dad are right outside. They love you. They're waiting." Her eyelids quivered. A single tear appeared from nowhere at the outer corner of one eye and slid onto the pillow, an impossible detail given her hydration status, and yet, there it was. A clean, shining line cutting through the pallor, as if something inside her insisted on leaving a mark. I leaned closer, unable to help myself, and felt the whisper again, not in my ear this time, but in the small space between her mouth and mine where breath becomes sound. "Don't let him in." My rational mind shrugged into its white coat and began listing explanations. Postictal confabulation, misperception, my own fatigue, the common human error of pattern seeking in noise. But there was a second mind in me that night, older than protocols and cooler than fear, that simply listened. I looked up at the door to the hall, half expecting a silhouette to fill it, some person-shaped absence the room would name too late. No one stood there, and yet the hinge gave a small, tired groan, as if it had just shifted its weight in anticipation of a hand. The hum of the trauma bay was steady, too steady, as though the machines had decided to perform for us, to put on the play of stability while something else gnawed at the truth underneath. Her vitals painted the picture of a child whose body was recovering. Heart rate easing down, oxygen level reliable, blood pressure nestling into normal ranges. If you only looked at the numbers, you could almost believe she was safe. But numbers don't breathe. Numbers don't shiver. Numbers don't whisper warnings that bend the air in your chest. I looked at her face and saw the thin dusk of cyanosis still lingering at her lips, the faint tremor of her fingers curling into the sheets as though she were clinging to something invisible. Her breaths were shallow, too shallow for the cheerful green waveform that marched across the screen. The monitor was lying, and I hated it for that. The attending murmured something about waiting on labs, about prepping her for EEG in the morning, but his words seemed to echo from a great distance. I couldn't stop watching her mouth, waiting for it to move again. I wanted to believe the whisper was nothing more than noise, but the way her eyelids twitched, the way her chest rose unevenly, the way the air in the room thickened with every passing minute told me otherwise. "Claire?" the other nurse said softly, pulling me back. "You okay?" I nodded, but my throat was dry. "Yeah, just thinking." The girl's tear from before had left a darker patch on the pillow. It hadn't spread, hadn't evaporated. It sat there like proof, stubborn against the light. I told myself to look away, to ground myself in the rhythm of work, but every time I tried, my gaze was pulled back to her, as though her body were a magnet and I the needle. And then the father's voice bled through the door. Muffled at first, just sound pressing against sound, then sharper. "I want to see her." The attending glanced up, irritation flickering. "Not yet," he muttered. "Not while we're—" The pounding came next. A fist against the trauma bay door. Once, twice, 3 times. It didn't sound like a desperate father. It sounded like something demanding entry. Something certain it was owed. The girl's eyes fluttered open, wide at the sound, and her lips parted. No air at first, only the shape. I leaned closer. She forced out the faintest breath, just enough to shape it again. "Don't let him in." I recoiled, my scalp prickling. The attending didn't hear it. The other nurse didn't either. I could tell by their unbroken movements, their eyes on the monitors and meds. It was meant for me. Only me. The pounding grew louder. The father's voice cracked. "She's my daughter. You can't keep me out." And yet when I turned my head toward the door, my stomach lurched. His shadow stretched wrong. The light from the hallway was steady, fixed, but the darkness on the floor beneath the door flickered, extended, pulled toward us like liquid seeping under. His voice had an undertone now, something too low for a human throat, vibrating the glass pane. The girl seized suddenly, a violent shudder that lifted her shoulders from the mattress. The monitor screamed arrhythmia, then corrected itself as though embarrassed. The attending rushed forward, ordering more Ativan, but I was already pressing my hand against her small arm, whispering words I didn't recognize until I heard them aloud. "You're safe. He can't come in." For a moment, her muscles eased beneath my palm, and her breathing slowed, shallow but more rhythmic. The monitor, of course, showed nothing useful. Flat lines of normalcy, as though daring me to trust it over my own eyes. When I looked up, I caught the attending staring at me, puzzled. I must have looked strange, crouched over her, whispering like a mother instead of a nurse. But he said nothing. The pounding stopped. Silence fell so hard it seemed to suck the air from the room. I turned slowly toward the door. Through the small pane of glass, the father's face was visible, half lit by the hallway lamp. His eyes weren't wide with grief. They were narrowed, focused, the way a predator watches the opening of a cage. And when our gazes locked, I felt heat roll through me. Not warmth, not kindness, but heat like an engine burning too long, a furnace stoked with things that should never have been burned. I remembered my grandmother's voice, words I hadn't thought about since childhood. She used to say children were closest to the veil, that angels fought for them and demons hunted them because innocence was the purest prize. I had dismissed it all as superstition, the ramblings of an old woman who lit too many candles. But tonight, in this fluorescent room, I felt those words press against my chest with the weight of truth. This wasn't just a sick child. This was a battlefield. The girl's body arched again, but her eyes opened wide, locked onto mine, and she mouthed the words one more time. "Don't let him in." There was strength in it now, defiance in the set of her lips. Not a plea. A command. "Claire," the attending said, his tone sharpened. "I need you." "I know," I interrupted, more harshly than I meant to. My voice sounded foreign. "I'm here." The father's shadow shifted, then vanished as if he'd stepped away. The silence afterward was worse, like the pause between a held breath and a scream. The girl's heart rate plummeted on the monitor, a free fall the machine insisted wasn't happening, even as her skin grew dusky, her lips deep into purple. The monitor lied, but her body told the truth. "Pulse ox is flat," the other nurse barked. "No, it isn't," I snapped. "Look at her. Look at her." The attending swore under his breath, shoved the machine aside, and pressed fingers to the girl's carotid. "Damn it, she's bradying down. Get EPI, now." The monitor corrected itself suddenly, as if it had just remembered its script, showing the exact collapse we were already witnessing. But I couldn't shake the certainty that the machine hadn't failed. It had been silenced, as though something wanted us blind, deaf, too slow. We worked quickly, urgently. IV push. Chest compressions when her pulse faded. Breath after breath forced into her lungs. And with every push of my palms against her chest, I whispered under my breath, unheard by anyone else. "You're not alone. You're not alone." Outside, in the hall, I thought I heard a sound. Not a cry, not even a shout. A laugh. Low, thin, stretching across the tiles like smoke. We brought her back. A flutter, then a weak pulse. Oxygen saturations crawling upward again. Relief pulsed through the room like a second heartbeat. The attending wiped his forehead, muttered something about close call. But I couldn't join in the relief. Because when I looked down at her, she was staring past me. Past the ceiling, eyes wide with something no child should ever have to see. And her lips shaped words again, though this time no sound came at all. But I knew them. I had heard them enough to recognize the shape. "Don't let him in." The trauma bay door rattled suddenly, just once, like something striking it from the outside, and then was still. And in that stillness I felt it, the certainty that we hadn't just fought for a child's body. We had fought for her soul. The girl's pulse had returned, fragile but present, a small flame flickering in a draft. The monitor sang its song of compliance, but I no longer trusted it. I trusted only what I could see. The faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelids fluttered in rhythm with breaths too shallow, the bluish tint around her lips that no green waveform could erase. Numbers can be manipulated, numbers can lie, but the body tells its truth even in silence. The trauma bay felt heavier with each passing second. It wasn't just fatigue, though my muscles trembled with it. It was the air itself, as though the walls had thickened, pressing in from every direction. The overhead light hummed with an extra pitch, too high to be natural, like the faint scream of metal under strain. I glanced at the other nurse, wondering if she noticed, but her focus was tight on charting, jaw clenched, knuckles pale. Maybe she did notice. Maybe she didn't want to name it. A sudden pop above us startled everyone. One of the fluorescent tubes flickered violently, then dimmed, leaving half the bay in a stuttered half-light. The attending cursed under his breath, muttering something about maintenance. I didn't say what I saw, that the light hadn't simply failed. It had pulsed, as though something had passed through it. The girl twitched again, but this time her eyes flew wide open. No seizure, no random muscular storm. Her gaze locked onto mine with terrifying clarity. Her lips parted, breath rattling, and though the sound was faint, the words carried with impossible weight. "Don't let him in." The attending didn't react. The other nurse didn't even glance up. They hadn't heard, only me. I bent closer, whispering before I could stop myself. "I won't." My voice shook, but the promise felt real. I hadn't meant to give it, but I had. The door rattled again. Once, then twice, harder than before. The glass pane shivered in its frame. Outside, I could hear raised voices, security telling the father to step back, his tone shifting from desperation to something sharper. "She needs me." His voice bled through, muffled but strong. "You don't understand. She needs me." I stiffened. His words were wrong. Not their meaning, but their sound. There was no grief in them, no break of a father begging for his child. It was possessive, certain, commanding. The girl whimpered, her small fingers curling tighter around the sheet. I smoothed her hand, my own trembling despite every effort. "You're safe," I whispered again, unsure whether I was comforting her or myself. Then the smell hit us. At first faint, like a wire burning somewhere deep in the hospital walls. Acrid, metallic, wrong. The attending wrinkled his nose. "What the hell?" He glanced toward the light fixtures, then the wall sockets. The odor swelled, not dissipating, not diffusing like normal smoke, but sharpening, targeting. I knew the smell. Everyone who's worked long nights in a hospital knows it. Burning wires, plastic melting, but beneath it was something sulfurous, ancient. The other nurse gagged softly and covered her mouth. "It's like rotten eggs." I swallowed hard. My grandmother's voice pressed against memory. Demons reveal themselves in smell when they can't yet take form. Sulfur, fire, smoke. I had laughed at her once, when I was young. I wasn't laughing now. The monitor chirped happily, displaying stability. But the girl's chest heaved once, shallow and weak, then again, weaker still. Her skin grew dusky, shadows bruising her cheeks. "She's not perfusing," I snapped. The attending glanced at the monitor, frowning. "Numbers, look." "Forget the numbers, look at her." His eyes shifted back to her body, and I saw it in his face. The recognition the moment the data could no longer shield him. Damn it, bag her. The respiratory therapist fitted the mask over her nose and mouth, squeezing the bag in rhythmic bursts. Oxygen flooded her, chest rising, chest falling. But the whisper returned again, vibrating against my skull like a bell. "Don't let him in." The trauma bay door groaned under another blow. A fist? A shoulder? It didn't matter. The whole frame rattled, the glass pane trembling in sympathy. And with each impact, the girl's body convulsed as though tethered to the door itself. The attending ordered another round of meds, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at the door, at the silhouette pressing against it. His shadow stretched across the tile, far longer than the light source allowed. Too long, too thick. It seeped under the frame in dark rivulets, writhing like smoke. The girl gasped under the mask, eyes wide, throat working against the plastic seal. Her pupils dilated, black swallowing color, and for an instant she looked older, impossibly older, as though something behind her gaze had stepped forward. Her lips moved against the oxygen mask, shaping words that no air could carry. I leaned closer, hearing them in the hollow between us, though no sound passed her throat. He's already here. A chill cut through me so sharply I almost dropped the bag valve. The father wasn't just outside. He was pressing at the edges of her, trying to crawl through the weakness in her body. The lights flickered again. One of the machines, the portable suction unit, screamed to life without anyone touching it, shrieking into the room with mechanical fury before sputtering and dying. The attending jumped, eyes wide. What the hell is going on with equipment tonight? But it wasn't equipment. It was invasion. The girl's heart rate plummeted again, monitor stuttering, then freezing on a normal rhythm even as her body seized. Her arms flung wide, IV tubing straining against tape. A low growl filled the air, not from her throat, not from anyone's throat, but from the walls themselves, vibrating through the steel and glass. The other nurse screamed, stumbling back. I pressed my hand to the girl's sternum, whispering words I didn't even know I remembered. Protect her, keep her safe. Don't let him in. The door rattled one last time, then fell still. The silence that followed was worse than the pounding, suffocating in its completeness. Then the father's voice came, soft, almost tender. She needs me. Let me in. The words rolled through the door, smooth, gentle, almost kind. But beneath them was something else, something hungry. The sound of a promise and a threat braided together. The attending sighed, shaking his head. Security can't hold him forever. We'll have to let him see her soon. No, I said, too sharply, startling even myself. Not yet. He frowned. Claire? Not yet, I repeated, my hand still on the child's chest, feeling the faint flutter of her heart. If we let him in now, we lose her. The attending looked at me like I had spoken a different language, like he wasn't sure if I was exhausted, delusional, or dangerous. But I didn't care. I knew. The girl had told me, again and again, and I had promised her. Behind me, the lights flickered one last time, plunging the trauma bay into half-darkness. The monitor beeped steadily, cheerfully, lying as it always had. The girl's lips moved beneath the mask, whispering words only I could hear. Don't let him in. And outside the door, the father's silhouette lingered, patient now, waiting. The pounding never came again. The door stayed still, the glass pane trembling no more. For a moment, the trauma bay felt like the center of the world's silence, as though every sound outside had been muted. The machines hummed in their artificial rhythms. The bag valve mask hissed with each compression of oxygen, but underneath, I heard nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no echoes. Only silence. And silence, in a hospital, is never peace. It is anticipation. The girl's body shuddered once more, a violent tremor that arched her back from the mattress. The monitor spiked, corrected, spiked again. The attending swore under his breath, leaning over her with the kind of grim focus that belongs only to those who know they are losing ground. Then it happened. The air shifted. Not a breeze, not a vent, an actual shift. Pressure pushing down, then lifting, as though something massive had just stood up and left the room. The sulfur smell vanished instantly, replaced with the sterile scent of alcohol wipes and latex gloves, sharp but clean. The fluorescent light that had flickered burned steady now, without falter. The girl's body eased back into the bed, her limbs falling soft, her chest rising with the measured breath of sleep. The monitor caught up this time, numbers aligning perfectly with what we saw. The attending blinked. Well, that's more like it. He checked her pupils, pressed lightly against her wrist. Pulse is good. Breathing shallow but regular. Stabilizing. His tone carried the relief of a man who believed medicine had finally taken hold. But I knew better. Medicine hadn't won anything. Something had been here, and now it was gone. Or pretending to be. The door opened, security stepped aside, and the father walked in. No protest, no force, no anger. Just walked in, as though he'd been invited all along. His face looked different. The sharpness I'd seen earlier, the predator's focus, was gone. His eyes were damp, his jaw slack with grief, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. He looked like a father again. The girl stirred at the sound of his footsteps. Her eyelids fluttered open, and when she saw him, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Daddy," she whispered, hoarse but clear. The father broke then, utterly, collapsing to his knees beside the bed, clutching her hand as though it were the rope to pull him out of drowning water. Tears fell freely, wetting the sheets. He pressed his forehead against her small palm, sobbing. "I'm here. I'm right here, baby. I've got you." The attending gave a quiet nod, signaling to the rest of us that the storm had passed. The other nurse sighed, exhausted, closing her eyes for a moment as though allowing the room to breathe again. Even the respiratory therapist, hardened by years of chaos, reached up to adjust the mask gently, her movements tender. But I stood frozen, watching. Because the girl looked fixed, the father looked redeemed, the air felt lighter, the weight lifted. Yet beneath it all, I felt it. A thread of wrongness, a lingering shadow pressed thin against the walls, too faint for anyone else to notice. The whisper had stopped, but its absence was not comfort. It was vacancy. And vacancies are meant to be filled. The girl's hand tightened around mine when I reached to check her IV. She looked at me with the wide, glassy clarity of a child who has just woken from a nightmare and wants reassurance that the world is safe again. Her eyes shone, reflecting the steady light above. "He's gone," she murmured. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe her. But when her father lifted his head, his face streaked with tears. His eyes caught the light in a way that made my chest constrict. Too reflective, too sharp at the edges, like the glint of glass in a dark alley. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the soft gaze of a broken man. But I saw it. The attending clapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Good work, Claire. That was close, but we pulled her through." I nodded, forcing my lips into a thin smile. Good work. That's what it was supposed to be. A case, a crisis, a recovery. We would chart it, log it, present it at rounds. We would talk about differentials, seizures of unclear origin, the miracle of a child's resilience. But none of those words could explain what I had seen, what I had felt pressing against the edges of this room. None of it accounted for the smell, the shadow, the lie of the machines, or the warning whispered over and over in a voice too small to carry but heavy enough to split my soul. The father leaned over, kissing the girl's forehead. She closed her eyes and sighed, her body settling into sleep. It looked perfect, picture perfect. Father and daughter reunited, life restored, balance returned. But balance doesn't return that easily. When the shift finally ended, and I walked out into the pre-dawn air, the city smelled of rain, though the streets were dry. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was too loud to allow rest. I kept hearing the whisper, not as a warning now, but as a reminder. Don't let him in. We had won something tonight, yes. The girl was alive, the father was calm, the room was clean again, but battles don't end so neatly. Something had been here, and something had left. Where had it gone? Into the walls of the hospital? Into another patient down the hall? Into one of us? As I drove home, the sun just beginning to bleed over the horizon, I thought of my daughter asleep in her bed. I thought of my sister, buried long ago. And I thought of the little girl's eyes, wide and knowing, and the way her lips had shaped words that still haunted me. The case will always remind me that not everything we fight in the ER bleeds, and not everything we save is saved for good. Some battles are invisible, and some victories are only pauses before the next assault. And somewhere, even now, I can't shake the feeling that what left that room is still moving, still waiting, still looking for the next open door.